Good evening. My name is Evan Gregory, and this is Bible Answers. We're going to continue our study in the book of Acts. We're looking at Acts chapter 23 tonight. And a couple weeks ago, we looked at Acts chapter 22. We see where Paul is now in Jerusalem, and a mob has formed around Paul. They don't like what he's doing, they think that he's teaching contrary to their beliefs. And what we see in the end of chapter 22 is that Paul is actually going to go before the chief priests and the council there to discuss more about what he believes. And so that takes us into Acts chapter 23. And as always, this is brought to you by the North Columbus Church of Christ located in Columbus, Mississippi. And you see our website scrolling below me. It's northcolumbuschristians.com. So getting right into the lesson. And before I forget, this is always a live show. So if you had any questions or comments, feel free to leave that. I can see those and I'll try to respond to them. And so we're in Acts chapter 23 again, verses 1 through 5. Paul is addressing the council, he's addressing the chief priests. And notice what he says. He says, Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to law? And those who stood by said, Do you revile God's high priest? And then Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, You shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. So Paul begins speaking to the council, and as soon as we see that the first thing he says is that he has lived in all good conscience before God until this day, which is it's a good point to make. And he's lived in a good conscience even when he was actively working against God. So when he was actively persecuting Christians, he was doing what he thought was right. Okay. And it's important thing for us to understand that just because we're doing things in good conscience, now we ought to be doing things in a clear and good conscience, but just because we're doing those things does not necessarily mean that what we're doing is right. Okay. And so, what he has been doing this whole time, Paul has, is that he's been doing things that he believed was right according to the truth. Okay. So while he was persecuting Christians, he thought he was doing right. He's recognized that he was wrong, and now he is following truth again. He continues to do what he believes is the right thing to do. And as soon as he says that, and you think about the context here. So he's just began to speak to the chief priest, and what happens? We see where the high priest tells somebody to strike him on the mouth. So they slap him or punch him as soon as he begins to talk. And you can imagine, and I think what we can see here with Paul's reaction is that I mean, I think we would expect a reaction like this. That it seems as though there's a little bit of anger here with what Paul has to say here. He says, God will strike you, you whitewash wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? So he calls the high priest here a hypocrite. He's saying, you're trying to judge me according to law. You strike me, what you're not supposed to do. And then notice the response of this that he says that those who stood by him said, Do you revile God's high priest? And so Paul here, and he's again, I think we can expect no less that there is that as he's being hit, he has this I don't know if outburst is the right word, but there's this anger, and yet immediately we see where people are saying, Hey, well, you shouldn't have said that. Do you revile God's high priest? And notice what Paul's response to this. He does not say, Well, what I've said is 100% true, and this is exactly what I think about him, which I think what Paul said is truthful here. He doesn't say anything wrong, but he is speaking against the high priest here. Okay, and that's why Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. So even during this time, he didn't know he was high priest, and he recognizes that he shouldn't have done it. He says that recognizes the law that says you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people, which I think is very interesting here. We see other places in the New Testament that Christians shouldn't speak evil against people. They shouldn't revile people. They shouldn't speak evil of those in authority either. And this is what I think Paul recognizes that, regardless of what I've said is true or not, that you're reviling someone who's in authority, and maybe we should check ourselves on that. And this is what he's doing here, and which is remarkable, and a remarkable an example of the character of Paul here. If I was in that situation, it would hard to react in the manner that he did. Certainly could understand his outburst after being slapped, but then kind of calmed me down and said, "Okay, well, I'm in the wrong here by what I just said." And that's, I think that's pretty remarkable there. And so it takes us to verses 6 through 9. It says, "But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men, brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. And when he said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees says that there is no resurrection and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. And then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisee party arose and protested, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." So after this, Paul is he's recognizes who these individuals are. So they're Pharisees and Sadducees, and we see where the Sadducees actually don't believe. It says here they don't believe in a resurrection or an angel or spirit, which is very remarkable. There's other things that said about that the Sadducees say while Jesus was alive to him, and speaks of this resurrection, and Paul uses that knowledge to his advantage, okay? And so Paul, was a Pharisee. He's talking about the resurrection, and these other Pharisees believe in a resurrection. And so when Paul says that I'm being judged concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, immediately that perks the ears of the individuals involved. So the Pharisees and especially the Sadducees. And once we start talking about the resurrection, well, we see where the Pharisees kind of, let's hear him out. Okay. The Sadducees apparently don't want anything to do with him. But the Pharisees have said, "Hold up, let's listen to him. We don't find any evil in him, but if a spirit has spoken to him, we can't fight against God." And so he uses these different parties and what he knows about these different parties to his advantage to maybe start to win over some of the crowd here, or at least have some of the crowd be more benevolent towards him. And so it takes us to verses 10 through 15. And it says, "Now when there arose a great dissension, and the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks. But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for you have testified, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, We have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him. but we are ready to kill him before he comes near. So we see this commander that has been previously mentioned in Acts chapter 22. We see him being brought forth again into this discussion. We see Paul, what Paul has said is creating a great dissension among the Jews. So just everywhere it seems like Paul is going, if there's a bunch of Jews there, what Paul is saying just rouses them up. Just causes them just to really come unglued, and that they are just out to get him. They're out to kill him. Okay, and so we see here that the commander's fearing that the Paul might be pulled to pieces, as the writer puts it, by the Jews here. And so he's brought back by the commander. He's brought into the barracks, and we see the Lord coming to him that night and telling him that just as you have testified for me in Rome, or testified for me in Jerusalem, rather, you're going to bear witness at Rome. So what we've seen in earlier places that uh, kind of gave us the idea that bad things were going to happen with Paul in Jerusalem. Well, bad things are happening, but he's not going to die in Jerusalem. Okay, he's not going to be killed here. He's going to Rome. He's going to bear witness at Rome, and so we see this conspiracy of these 40 Jews next, that they are saying that they're not going to eat or drink until they kill Paul. And so it seems as though they just absolutely finally had enough, that they're going to kill him. And so they get or concoct a scheme where they try to get the chief priests and elders to basically bring him down again and act like they're going to talk to him. They're going to question him some more. But when they get near him, they're going to kill him. Okay, so we have this great conspiracy that's forming amongst Paul here. And so remember, it has just been said, well, Paul is going to bear witness in Rome. So that means he's going to get out of Jerusalem, okay? All right, regardless of this conspiracy here, all right? And so we see that in the rest of this chapter that this conspiracy does not succeed. They don't kill Paul, and so in verses 16 through 22 it says, so when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, Paul, the prisoner, called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you. Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, what is that you have to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you. To the commander, let the young man depart, and commanded him, tell no one that you have revealed these things to me. So Paul apparently has some family in Jerusalem. So we see their sister's son. So this would be his nephew here. Okay. So his nephew hears of what's going on and runs to Paul, and eventually word comes to the commander that of what was going to happen, this conspiracy that the Jews have formed, that they're going to try to get him to lead Paul back to the chief priest, like they're going to kind of question him, but they're actually planning on killing him. There's 40 men that are lying in wait for him, and so we end this is saying that the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, tell no one that you have revealed these things to me. So we see that this conspiracy is formed. The Lord said, hey, you're going to get out of Jerusalem. We see where the nephew comes in. He hears of this conspiracy, tells the commander, don't fall for these folks' tricks. And we see, and what we will see is that things will work out for Paul, and he will be able to leave Jerusalem. And that takes us to verses 26 through 30. And it says, and he called for 2 centurions, saying, prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on and bring him safely to Felix the governor. So we see this 40-man conspiracy, and what we see here is that the commander is leaving no chance for these 40 men or anybody really to get Paul. So this would be a total of really 470 soldiers. We have 200 foot soldiers, 200 spearmen, and 70 horsemen. And Paul was actually going to be put on a horse and then brought to Felix the governor. So we have 470 versus 40, and so he's going to be. I mean, I think that's well or more than enough to protect Paul. And what we see here is that the commander is taking no chances for Paul, who is, at the end of the day, a Roman citizen, to be killed by these Jews. And he writes a letter. It says, in the following manner, Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. And it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man. I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. So they're taking him to Felix, the governor. And so he writes this letter explaining to him the situation. He says, I'm bringing them to you because these Jews are trying to kill him. Recognizing that what Paul had done, he hadn't broken any Roman laws, okay? But he recognizes that it was a question of their own Jewish law, which is really interesting because we think about Jesus before he was crucified, and Pilate recognizing that Jesus hadn't done anything wrong, and that the real beef, so to speak, was with the Jews. Okay, the Jews had problems with him and what he said about who he was and what he said about the law. And so a similar situation here with Paul. So he sends him to Felix. He commands the Jews, his accusers, to come before you as well, to bring those charges against him. So they're going to be lining up their case with Felix the governor. And so it takes us to verses 31 through 35. It's the end of the chapter. He says, then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. The next day they left the horsemen to go on with him and returned to the barracks. And when they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he had understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear you when your accusers also have come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. So Paul makes it to Caesarea, makes it to the governor Felix without harm, which it's always been curious to me is what happened to these 40 men. Did they keep their oath? Did they break their oath? But they took this oath and it was not fulfilled. They were not able to kill Paul. And so they make it to Caesarea, to Felix the governor, and he hears that he's from the province of Cilicia, which I assume he's making this case as far as confirming Roman citizenship and anything of that matter. And we see where now he's kind of free or clear from any Jewish persecution at this point. But now he starts this path of speaking to these Roman governors, these Roman authorities, and starts making his way actually to Rome. And we see here that he's being kept here is what's called Herod's praetorium. And so that ends Acts chapter 23. Again, I hope it's been useful for all of you. This is there's a lot that could be said about this chapter, but we just kind of hit the high points in a brief summary of each chapter as we go. So if you got any comments, questions, leave them. These videos are also being put on YouTube. Our YouTube page rather is North Columbus Church of Christ, and you can subscribe to our channel. You'll be notified when we have these new videos uploaded. We try to do them. Sometimes we don't do them every Sunday evening, but we try to do them every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. So keep up with that, and you can watch us live as well here on Facebook. So I hope this been useful for you again, and I hope that you all have a good day and a good rest of the week. Thanks.